The peak never announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as stability, wrapped in confidence, carried forward by momentum that feels permanent. By the time most people realize it has passed, the system has already begun to change. Every major civilization, every financial structure, every institutional order follows this same arc. Expansion creates belief. Belief creates participation. Participation creates scale. And scale creates fragility. What comes next is never sudden at first. It unfolds through phases so subtle they are mistaken for noise. This is what happens right after the peak. Not collapse, not chaos, not headlines. What comes first is normalization. The extraordinary becomes routine. Small disruptions are absorbed. Minor failures are reframed as temporary. The collective mood remains calm because daily life still works. Stores open. Salaries arrive. Infrastructure holds. From the outside, everything appears intact. But beneath the surface, the internal geometry of the system begins to shift. After the peak, growth no longer comes from strength. It comes from extension. Structures that once expanded organically now rely on reinforcement. Policies become reactive. Institutions become protective. Risk migrates from the edges toward the center, even as official language insists on resilience. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. In Rome, it appeared as administrative sprawl and currency dilution. In imperial Spain, as debt layered upon silver shipments. In industrial Britain, as overextended trade networks. In every case, the pattern began the same way. The system reached its maximum coherence. Then it started substituting momentum for health. People living inside these transitions rarely recognize them. That's not a failure of intelligence. It's a feature of human perception. We measure reality through continuity. If yesterday felt normal, today must be normal too. Gradual change doesn't trigger alarm. It creates adaptation. After the peak, the system still rewards participation. Careers progress. Investments mature. Innovations continue. There is no visible line separating expansion from contraction, only a slow reorientation of incentives. Stability becomes performative. Confidence becomes curated. What truly shifts is trust. Not trust in any single institution, but trust in the continuity of the whole. Contracts feel heavier. Promises feel longer. The future feels abstract. People begin to sense that outcomes are being managed rather than generated. Decisions become increasingly centralized, even as language emphasizes decentralization. This is the invisible transition phase. It's when complexity overtakes transparency, when feedback loops stretch, when consequences take longer to surface. Systems don't fail here. They reorganize. They become more interdependent, more layered, more opaque. Each adjustment solves a local problem, while quietly amplifying a systemic one. The peak marks the moment when a structure stops being primarily adaptive and starts becoming primarily preservative. From the inside, it feels like maturity. From the outside, it looks like success. From history's perspective, it's the beginning of a different cycle, not because anyone decided it, but because all complex systems eventually reach limits. And when they do, they don't fall apart. They drift. The drift is quiet, administrative, procedural. It lives in paperwork, in meetings, in delayed projects, and extended timelines. It settles into routines until no one remembers when forward motion subtly became maintenance instead entirely. Every large system leaves behind the same trail. You can trace it through clay tablets in Mesopotamia, through papyrus records in Egypt, through ledgers in Renaissance city-states. Expansion always begins with energy and clarity. Authority is simple. Rules are legible. Outcomes feel directly connected to effort. But after the peak, the structure thickens. Layers accumulate. Oversight multiplies. What once flowed starts to circulate. Empires don't end when they are conquered. They begin to fade when coordination costs exceed cohesion. The Roman state didn't fracture overnight. For centuries after its height, it still collected taxes, maintained roads, issued laws, and paid soldiers. What changed was efficiency. Provincial governors gained autonomy because the center could no longer process information fast enough. Coinage was quietly diluted to fund obligations that exceeded production. Military commands fragmented, not out of rebellion, but out of logistical necessity. Citizens didn't experience this as collapse. They experienced it as inconvenience. Higher fees, slower courts, fewer public works. These shifts felt temporary. They were framed as adjustments. And because daily life continued, most people assumed stability remained. A similar rhythm appeared in later financial systems. In early modern Europe, credit networks expanded trade faster than physical infrastructure could support it. Banks extended trust across borders. Monarchs borrowed against future revenue. And entire economies grew on expectations of continuity. After the peak, defaults didn't arrive as a single shock. They came as restructurings, renegotiations, and delayed payments. Confidence eroded gradually, replaced by procedural assurances. Institutions responded by adding safeguards, new regulations, new accounting standards, new oversight bodies. Each reform was logical. Each was meant to restore balance. Together, they made the system more complex and less comprehensible. That complexity created distance. Distance between decision-makers and outcomes. Distance between risk and responsibility. Distance between citizens and the structures shaping their lives. This is where psychological blindness emerges. People inside these systems adapt to whatever becomes normal. When transactions take longer, patience adjusts. When services decline, expectations recalibrate. When rules multiply, compliance replaces understanding. The human mind is extraordinarily good at acclimating to gradual change, especially when alternatives feel abstract. After the peak, language also shifts. Leaders stop talking about growth and start talking about stability. Organizations stop measuring progress and start measuring resilience. Success becomes defined as avoiding disruption rather than creating value. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of transition. The pattern repeats across cultures because it's rooted in how complexity behaves. As systems expand, they require more coordination. As coordination increases, response is slow. As response is slow, flexibility declines. Eventually, the structure becomes so optimized for past conditions that it struggles to adapt to new ones. This isn't corruption. It's inertia. In every era, there were thinkers who sensed a shift. They wrote about decadence, stagnation, or moral decline. But those interpretations missed the deeper mechanics. What was happening wasn't cultural decay. It was structural saturation. Once a system reaches a certain scale, it begins consuming more energy maintaining itself than improving itself. That's when preservation replaces innovation. From the inside, this feels responsible. From the outside, it looks cautious. From history's vantage point, it marks the start of a long plateau followed by gradual descent. And almost no one recognizes it while it's happening. If these patterns feel familiar, you might want to stay with the channel. This is what we unpack here. Because the most important phase isn't the fall. It's everything that happens quietly before it. Once preservation becomes the primary objective, the entire architecture of the system begins to reorganize around continuity rather than coherence. This is where the deeper mechanisms come into view. Trust doesn't vanish all at once. It thins. It becomes conditional. People still participate, but with less conviction. Contracts grow longer. Procedures become more elaborate. Verification replaces assumption. Every added layer is meant to increase reliability. Yet, collectively, they signal that shared belief has weakened. Institutions respond predictably. They formalize behavior. They codify exceptions. They build frameworks to manage uncertainty. Over time, these frameworks become the system. What started as tools turn into obligations. What began as flexibility becomes protocol. Inside large organizations, this transition is almost invisible. Most individuals are not shaping the whole. They're managing their segment. Each person optimizes locally, follows guidelines, meets targets, and solves immediate problems. No one sees the entire structure bending. Everyone experiences only their corridor of responsibility. Delayed feedback makes this worse. In small systems, cause and effect sit close together. A mistake shows up quickly. A success produces visible results. But in large, mature structures, consequences stretch across years and across departments. Decisions ripple through committees, markets, and jurisdictions before returning as outcomes. By the time effects surface, the original causes are buried beneath layers of process. This temporal distance creates false stability. Performance metrics remain positive because they measure activity, not alignment. Reports look healthy because they reflect inputs, not long-term integrity. The system appears functional even as its internal logic grows strained. People adapt. They learn how to navigate complexity instead of questioning it. They memorize procedures instead of understanding purpose. They protect their roles instead of examining results. Over time, institutional survival becomes disconnected from societal benefit, not through malice, through structure. After the peak, risk migrates upward. Decisions concentrate. Responsibility diffuses. Authority centralizes, while accountability spreads thinly across committees and departments. Everyone is involved, yet no one feels fully responsible. This is the paradox of scale. As systems grow larger, individual agency shrinks. Participants sense this, even if they can't articulate it. They become cautious. Innovation slows. Career incentives favor compliance over creativity. New ideas must pass through layers of approval, each designed to prevent disruption. Eventually, the system becomes excellent at maintaining itself and increasingly poor at adapting. Historical archives reveal this pattern repeatedly. In late imperial China, bureaucratic examinations produced extraordinarily capable administrators. Yet the administrative machine became so elaborate that response times to crises stretched dangerously long. In declining mercantile empires, shipping fleets remain impressive while trade margins quietly compressed. In mature industrial economies, productivity statistics held steady even as real purchasing power stagnated. None of this felt dramatic at the time. It felt like management. For the people inside, life continued. Projects moved forward. Policies were updated. Conferences were held. The system kept functioning, which reinforced the belief that it was still healthy. But beneath that continuity, the relationship between effort and outcome was changing. Returns diminished. Complexity increased. Trust thinned further. This is the phase where systems stop learning. They start repeating. When you look at the present through this historical lens, the parallels don't appear as crises. They appear as routines. Markets still open each morning. Governments still publish reports. Corporations still release earnings. Universities still grant degrees. From the surface, the machinery of modern life runs with remarkable consistency. But consistency isn't the same as alignment. After the peak, signals begin to blur. Price movements become harder to interpret. Policy changes feel disconnected from lived experience. Organizational decisions arrive fully formed, with explanations that emphasize necessity rather than clarity. The language of systems becomes abstract, filled with frameworks and projections, while individual experience becomes more constrained. This is how normalization works. Small disruptions no longer feel exceptional. They become part of the background. Supply delays, service reductions, procedural hurdles, institutional reversals. Each one is manageable on its own. Together, they reshape expectations. People don't revolt against this. They adjust. They update their calendars. They change providers. They accept longer timelines. They internalize uncertainty as a permanent feature of life. Collective behavior adapts quietly, trading long-term confidence for short-term continuity. Organizations mirror this adaptation. Instead of building capacity, they optimize efficiency. Instead of investing in resilience, they prioritize quarterly stability. Instead of addressing structural imbalances, they manage perception. Public statements emphasize strength. Internal memos emphasize caution. These aren't signs of incompetence. They're signs of maturity under strain. In late-stage systems, performance is increasingly sustained through coordination rather than creativity. Growth comes from leverage instead of innovation. Stability is achieved through intervention rather than equilibrium. This creates a peculiar atmosphere. Everything feels managed. Nothing feels resolved. New programs are launched while old ones remain unfinished. Temporary measures become permanent. Emergency frameworks quietly integrate into standard operations. Over time, the distinction between exception and norm dissolves. The psychological impact is subtle. People begin to sense that outcomes depend less on contribution and more on positioning. They focus on navigating structures rather than shaping them. Conversations shift from possibility to process. Aspirations narrow. Risk tolerance declines. The system doesn't collapse here. It thickens. Information travels faster than understanding. Data multiplies while insight fragments. Each institution becomes fluent in its own metrics, yet disconnected from whole. Coordination replaces cohesion. What makes this phase so difficult to recognize is that it still contains success. New technologies appear. Cultural movements rise. Local improvements happen. These developments create the impression of renewal. And in many ways, they are genuine, but they operate inside a larger framework that is already turned inward. The macro structure is conserving energy. You can see it in infrastructure that ages faster than it's replaced, in organizations that expand compliance departments while shrinking creative teams, in systems that celebrate innovation while quietly narrowing acceptable variance. None of this requires conspiracy. It emerges naturally when scale outpaces adaptability. History shows that this phase can last a long time. Decades, sometimes generations. People build lives inside it. Entire careers unfold without witnessing anything resembling collapse. Instead, they experience a steady recalibration of expectations. This is what makes the post-peak period so deceptive. Life continues, but the direction has changed. Every cycle ends the same way it begins, not with spectacle, but with subtle shifts in how people relate to their systems. After the peak, the most profound changes don't appear in markets or institutions first. They appear in collective psychology. Confidence becomes procedural. Optimism becomes cautious. The future feels less like a destination and more like an administrative process. History doesn't record these moments clearly. There are no precise markers, no universal dates. What remains are patterns reconstructed later. Once trajectories become visible, from a distance, the arc looks obvious. From inside it, everything feels ordinary. That is the quiet power of continuity. Civilizations rarely experience a single turning point. They move through transitions. Phases overlap. Old structures persist alongside new ones. Decline, when it arrives, doesn't replace prosperity overnight. It coexists with it. This is why people argue about whether anything has changed. Some point to technological advances. Others point to institutional strain. Both are correct. The cycle contains progress and contraction at the same time. What matters isn't any single indicator. It's the underlying direction of coordination, trust, and adaptability. After the peak, systems become less exploratory. They rely on precedent. They default to procedure. They protect what exists rather than imagining what could be. This isn't a moral failure. It's a natural response to accumulated complexity. Human societies build layers because layers feel safe. Rules, committees, frameworks, safeguards. Each one reduces immediate risk. Together, they slow response. Over time, the structure becomes heavy with its own history. People inside these systems continue doing meaningful work. Teachers teach. Engineers design. Doctors care for patients. Artists create. Daily life carries on, rich with effort and intention. The cycle doesn't erase human value. It reframes it. Individual contributions matter, but they move within channels shaped long before any one person arrives. Choices feel personal, yet they unfold inside inherited constraints. The system sets the tempo. This is why endings are rarely dramatic. They are administrative. Budgets tighten. Standards change. Responsibilities shift. Priorities are rebalanced. None of this feels like a conclusion. It feels like management, and that's the final phase. Not collapse. Continuation under different rules. Eventually, historians give names to these periods. Late Empire, post-industrial transition, mature financial era. But those labels come later, for the people living through it. There's only the present, adjusting itself one policy, one process, one expectation at a time. The peak fades into memory without ceremony. What remains is a long, quiet recalibration between what the system promises and what it can sustainably deliver. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Every generation inherits structures at a particular point in their cycle. No one chooses a phase they're born into. They simply participate in it. And long after the momentum has shifted, after preservation has replaced expansion, after complexity has overtaken clarity, life continues inside the new equilibrium. The world doesn't end. It just becomes something else. That transformation is rarely announced. It's lived. And by the time it's fully understood, it has already been underway for a very long time.